The champagne flute caught the light when my father stood up. I saw it from across the room, that shimmer of gold, and for exactly 1 second, my heart lifted. I thought, this is it. This is the moment he finally looks at me, the way a father is supposed to look at his daughter on her wedding day. I was wearing my mother's pearls. My hands were still trembling from the ceremony. My husband Daniel had just squeezed my fingers under the table and whispered, "You are the most beautiful woman in this room." I believed him. For the first time in my life, I believed someone who said something kind about me. Then my father tapped his knife against the glass. The room went quiet. 180 people, people who had driven from 3 states to celebrate us, turned toward the sound. My father cleared his throat. He looked across the table. He looked past me, past Daniel, past my mother, past my grandmother, past my maid of honor, who was already raising her glass. He looked at my sister Renee, and he said, "I want to raise a glass to the most extraordinary woman in this family. She's the daughter I always wanted." He was not looking at the bride. He was not looking at me. The room went so quiet I could hear the candles burning. And I did something nobody in that ballroom expected. I stood up. Welcome back to Revenge Stories Unfolded. I'm Claire, 34 years old, a high school English teacher from Asheville, North Carolina. And this is the story of what happened the night my father chose my sister at my own wedding, and what the next 11 months looked like for every single person in that room. If you have ever been erased by the people who were supposed to celebrate you the loudest, stay with me, because this story does not end at that table. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell. I drop new stories every week, and trust me, you do not want to miss what happens at the end of this one. And drop a comment right now and tell me, has someone ever stolen your moment? Type my moment in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Claire Whitmore. I grew up in a small town outside Raleigh, the eldest daughter of Gerald and Patricia Whitmore. My father ran an insurance office. My mother taught piano lessons out of the front room on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. We were not rich. We were not poor. We were the kind of family that went to church every Sunday, smiled at the neighbors, and saved all the real conversations for never. My sister Renee is 4 years younger than me. She is blonde, whereas I am brown-haired. Effortless, where I was always trying. She walked into rooms like she was already expected. I walked into rooms and spent 20 minutes figuring out where to stand. I do not say any of this with bitterness anymore. I say this because you need to understand the architecture of what my family built, and why it took me 34 years to finally read the blueprints clearly. For as long as I can remember, Renee was my father's daughter. I was nobody's in particular. It was not dramatic. That is what I want you to understand. It was never dramatic. There was no single explosion, no moment where my father sat me down and said the quiet part out loud. It was 1,000 smaller things. The way he lit up when Renee walked into the kitchen for breakfast. The way his voice changed when he talked about her to his friends at church. Renee is going to study business. Renee made varsity. Renee got the internship. I graduated summa cum laude from UNC Chapel Hill with a degree in English literature. My father said, "That's nice, Claire. What are you going to do with that?" I became a teacher. I have been teaching for 10 years. Last spring, 41 of my seniors were accepted to 4-year universities. 2 of my students got into Columbia. 1 got a full scholarship to Duke. I have won the District Teacher of the Year award twice. My father has never asked me about my students. But he can tell you Renee's quarterly sales figures at the pharmaceutical company where she works, down to the decimal point. I am not telling you this so you feel sorry for me. I am telling you this so you understand the specific weight of what my father said at that wedding. It was not an accident. It was not a slip of the tongue from a man who had too much champagne. It was the most honest thing Gerald Whitmore had said in 34 years. He just said it in front of 180 people on the worst possible night to say it. I need to tell you about Daniel before I tell you anything else, because Daniel is the reason any of the rest of this was possible. Daniel Reeves is a structural engineer from Hendersonville. He is 6'1", reads 2 books a week, and makes the best chicken tortilla soup you have ever tasted in your life. He is also the first person who ever looked at me like I was the main event. We met at a mutual friend's dinner party 3 years ago. I spilled red wine on his shirt within the first 10 minutes. He laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, the kind that comes from the belly, the kind that has no strategy in it. I thought this man was safe. And I was right. When I told Daniel about my family, about the specific shape of growing up invisible in your own house, he did not try to fix it. He did not say, "I'm sure they love you, they just have a hard time showing it." He said, "That sounds exhausting, Claire. I'm sorry you carried that alone." I cried for 45 minutes. Nobody had ever said those two sentences to me in that order before. We got engaged on a Tuesday evening in October. No grand gesture. We were washing dishes together after dinner, and he just turned to me, soap on his hands, and said, "I want to do this with you for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" The ring was in his jacket pocket in the hallway. He had been carrying it for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment, and decided the right moment was any moment when we were just being ourselves. That is the man I married. When we started planning the wedding, Daniel asked me once, carefully, how involved I wanted my family to be. I said I wanted to give them one more chance. I think I already knew what they would do with it. I think some part of me needed to see it in front of witnesses, so I could finally stop arguing with myself about whether it was real. I gave them the chance. They did not disappoint. The wedding was held on a Saturday in April at the Biltmore Estate grounds in Asheville. 200 guests invited, 180 confirmed. We had a string quartet for the ceremony and a 12-piece band for the reception. I wore a dress I found at a boutique in Charleston, ivory silk with hand-embroidered flowers along the neckline. I did almost everything myself. Daniel helped with the logistics. My best friend and maid of honor, Priya, handled the vendor coordination. My mother showed up to 2 planning meetings, spent most of both of them talking about Renee's new apartment in Charlotte, and contributed one opinion about the floral centerpieces that nobody asked for. My father's contribution to the wedding was to write a check for $3,000, which covered approximately half the cost of the catering deposit, and to show up in a rented tuxedo looking like a man attending someone else's event. Renee was a bridesmaid. I asked her because she was my sister. She accepted without enthusiasm. She showed up to exactly one fitting, complained that her dress color washed out her complexion, and spent the rehearsal dinner talking to my father at the far end of the table about her sales territory expansion. I watched them from across the room that night. My father leaned toward my sister, animated, interested, alive in the conversation. I was sitting next to Daniel's mother, who was telling me about her garden, and I remember thinking, that is fine. Tomorrow is my day. Whatever this is, whatever they are and are not, tomorrow I will stand in a room and be seen. I really believed that. I put on my mother's pearls the next morning, believing it with my whole heart. The reception started at 6 o'clock. By 7:30, dinner had been served. The band was on its first break. Tables hummed with conversation. Daniel's hand found mine under the white linen tablecloth every few minutes, a quiet anchor. My father had been drinking, but not excessively. This is important. Some people will tell you that moments like this come from a bottle. They do not. They come from the truth a person has been storing for years, and the alcohol just loosens the lid. He stood up without warning. No one had announced a toast. The wedding coordinator had given everyone a clear schedule for the formal toasts earlier in the evening. My father had not been on it. He had not been asked to speak. He stood up anyway. He tapped his champagne flute with a dessert knife, 3 sharp rings that cut through every conversation in the room. 180 people looked toward the sound. I watched my father's face as the room quieted. There was something in his expression I had seen before, but never quite been able to name. It was not cruelty exactly. It was more like relief. The face of a man about to say the thing he had been thinking for a very long time. He turned toward Renee. "I want to say something," he said, "about the most extraordinary woman in this family." He paused. His voice was steady. "Renee, you are everything a father could ask for in a daughter. You are the one I always saw myself in. You are the daughter I always wanted." He raised his glass. The room did not move. I felt Daniel's hand go still under the tablecloth. I felt Priya's breath catch 2 seats down. I felt my mother look at her plate. I felt my own heartbeat, very slow, very clear, the way your heartbeat sounds right before something changes permanently. I looked at my father. He still had not looked at me. He was looking at Renee, who had a complicated expression on her face, something between pleasure and the awareness that this was not entirely appropriate. I looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at me, and I stood up. "Don't go anywhere. Do not skip ahead." What I said next changed the entire night, and what happened in the 11 months after will leave your jaw on the floor. Make sure you are subscribed so you never miss a story like this one. And while you are right here, tell me in the comments, what would you have done? Would you have walked out? Stayed silent? Screamed? I need to know. I want to be honest with you about what happened inside me in the 2 seconds between Daniel looking at me and me standing up. I was not angry. I know that sounds impossible. I know if you are sitting where you are right now, you are thinking, how were you not furious? How did you not flip that table? How did you not scream? I was not angry because I was not surprised. And you cannot be furious at something you already knew was true. What I felt was something quieter and much more permanent than anger. It was clarity. The specific, crystalline clarity that arrives when you stop hoping for something to be different than it is. My father had just told 180 people with a champagne flute in his hand what he had been telling me in small pieces my entire life, and I was done translating it into something survivable. I stood up slowly. I did not knock back my chair. I did not reach for a microphone. I simply stood up the way a woman stands up when she has decided something, and I looked at my father across the table, and I said 6 words in a voice that was completely, absolutely calm. Sit down, Gerald. I've got this. I used his first name. I had never called my father by his first name in my life. The room understood immediately what had happened. You could feel it, that collective intake of breath, the recalibration of 180 people, understanding that the wedding had just shifted into something they were not prepared for. My father sat down. I reached for my own champagne flute. My hand was steady. That surprised me most of all, how steady my hands were. 10 years of standing in front of teenagers who can smell fear had taught me something about presence. I looked at Daniel first, only for a second. He gave me the smallest nod I have ever seen. It meant, I am right here. It meant, whatever you are about to do, I am with you. It meant, you are not alone in this room. I turned to face the room. My father just offered a toast, I said. I want to offer one too. I paused, long enough for the silence to do its work. I want to toast everyone in this room who drove hours to be here tonight, who took time off work, who brought gifts, who sat through a ceremony in April wind and still looked beautiful doing it. A few laughs, carefully placed. I want to toast Daniel's family, who welcomed me before they even knew me, which tells you everything you need to know about the kind of people they are. More applause. I want to toast Priya, who has been my best friend for 18 years and who did more work to make this night happen than anyone in this room knows. Priya covered her mouth with her hand, and I want to say one more thing. The room was so quiet. I spent a long time waiting to be the daughter that was wanted. I worked hard at it. I tried in every way I knew how, and somewhere along the way, I learned something that took me far too long to understand. I looked at Daniel. You do not need to be the daughter someone wanted. You need to find the person who wants exactly the daughter you already are. I raised my glass to Daniel, who has never once made me feel like the wrong choice, and to everyone in this room who showed up tonight because you wanted to. That is what love looks like. Cheers. 180 people stood up. Not all at once, not choreographed, but in that cascading wave, the way crowds rise when something real happens, starting from Daniel's side and rolling outward until the entire ballroom was on its feet. My father did not stand. My mother stood, but she was crying, and I could not tell you even now whether those tears were for me or for me. Renee stared at her champagne glass. I sat down. Daniel put his arm around me and pressed his mouth to my temple and said, very quietly, "That's my wife." And I thought, yes, that is exactly what I am. His wife, a teacher, a woman who just said true things out loud to 180 witnesses. I thought, I am going to be okay. I had no idea what was coming next. The rest of the wedding reception was, by every measure, extraordinary. The band played until midnight. People danced until their shoes came off. Daniel's cousin Marcus gave an unrehearsed toast at 9 o'clock that made half the room cry laughing. 3 different couples told us later that our wedding made them want to renew their vows. My father left at 8:45. He did not say goodbye to me. My mother stayed until 10. She hugged me at the door and said, "You looked beautiful today, Claire." It was the first time she had said those words to me on my wedding day. It was 9 hours after they should have been said, but I took them anyway. Renee left with my father. She sent me a text at 11:20 that night that said, "Dad is really upset. I think you embarrassed him." I read it standing in the hotel bathroom in my wedding dress, Priya unhooking my buttons, and I showed it to her, and Priya said something I will not repeat on this platform, but that I agreed with completely. I put my phone face down on the marble counter and went back out to my husband. We did not go on our honeymoon right away. We had planned a trip to Portugal for 3 weeks after the wedding to give ourselves time to breathe. In those 3 weeks, I waited to see what the silence from my family would do to me. It did less than I expected. That was the first surprise. I had spent so long dreading the loss of their approval that I had not considered what it would feel like to discover I had already survived it. The approval had never really been there. What I had been protecting was the possibility of it. And the wedding night had closed that door so completely, so publicly, that there was nothing left to protect. I felt, in those 3 weeks, something I had no name for at first. It took me until the second week to recognize it as relief. What happened over the next 11 months? I could not have scripted if I tried. It started small. The week we returned from Portugal, I got an email from the mother of one of my former students. Her daughter Maya had been struggling in my junior English class 3 years ago, behind on reading, convinced she was not smart enough for college. I had stayed after school with Maya twice a week for 7 months. I had helped her apply to 3 schools. Maya had just graduated from NC State with a degree in communications. Her mother's email was 6 paragraphs long. She wrote, "You are the reason my daughter believed she was capable of more. I have been meaning to write this letter for 3 years, and I am ashamed it took me this long. Maya talks about you constantly. You changed her life." I read it at my kitchen table on a Wednesday morning, and I cried for 20 minutes. Not because I needed it, but because I had spent so long being invisible to the people I came from, I had almost forgotten other people could see me clearly. A month later, my principal called me into her office. Dr. Angela Morris, 61 years old, with 22 years as an educator, the kind of woman who does not waste words. She told me the school district had nominated me for the State Teacher of the Year award, the full state award, not just the district level. She said, "Frankly, Claire, you should have been nominated 2 years ago. I'm sorry it took this long." I thought about my father in that moment, the man who had asked me what I was going to do with an English degree. I did not say that out loud, but I thought it. 2 months after that, I got a call from a publishing editor in New York, a small literary press. I had been submitting a collection of personal essays for 18 months, a quiet project I worked on at night after grading papers, stories about teaching, about language, about the particular intimacy of spending your days trying to put the right words into young people's hands. The editor said, "We want to publish this. We think it's important." I sat in my car in the school parking lot for 15 minutes after that call. I called Daniel. He said, "I knew it. I knew it since the first essay you showed me." I called Priya. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I did not call my parents, not because I wanted to punish them, but because I had finally understood something I should have learned years earlier. The people who minimized your work while you were building it do not get a front row seat to the unveiling. That is not cruelty. That is self-preservation. That is the quiet decision to stop handing your most tender things to people who have shown you, repeatedly, what they will do with them. Stay right here. Do not click away. What happens next involves my father, a phone call I never expected, and a moment that cracked something open in both of us that I am still not sure how to describe. Subscribe if you have not already. Share this story with one person right now who needs to hear it, and drop your thoughts below. I am watching the comments tonight. 8 months after the wedding, my father called me on a Sunday afternoon. I almost did not answer. I was grading papers, a stack of junior essays on my lap, red pen in hand, Daniel asleep on the couch next to me with a football game running low in the background. It was a perfectly ordinary Sunday. I had gotten good at those. I looked at the screen. "Gerald Whitmore," I answered. He did not say hello. He said, "Your book got reviewed in the Raleigh paper this morning." The collection had come out 6 weeks earlier. A small release, no major press tour, an interview with a regional literary magazine, and a reading at a bookstore in Asheville, where 43 people showed up, which my editor said was exceptional for a debut essay collection. "I saw it," I said. Silence. "The reviewer said you were one of the most important new voices in Southern literature." I read the review, Dad. More silence. The kind of silence that has weight. I didn't know you were writing a book, he said. You never asked what I was working on. I heard him breathe, slow, deliberate, the breath of a man choosing his next words very carefully. There's an essay in there, he said, about a teacher who grew up feeling like a stranger in her own family. Yes. Is that about us? I looked at Daniel, still asleep. I looked at the stack of essays on my lap, 120 teenagers trusting me with their words. It's about me, I said. It's always been about me. He was quiet for so long that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, I read the whole thing this morning. Viviane had to go to church without me. My father had never, in my entire memory, missed a Sunday church service voluntarily. I didn't know, he said, quietly, so quietly, I had to press the phone hard against my ear. I didn't know you were carrying all of that. I know you didn't, I said. That was part of the problem. Another long silence. The toast, he said, at the wedding. Yes, I've thought about it every day since. I did not help him. I had spent years making it easier for people to avoid the hard sentence. I sat in my living room on a Sunday afternoon, and I let my father find his own way to it. I was wrong, he said. What I said was wrong, and I said it in the worst possible place. And I have spent 8 months trying to figure out how to tell you that, and not finding a way to start. I breathed. I don't know if that's enough, I said. I don't know what enough even looks like yet. But I hear you. That's fair, he said. That's more than fair. We talked for 47 minutes. The longest uninterrupted conversation I had ever had with my father in my life. He talked about his own father, a man who handed out love in such small rations that my father had grown up believing scarcity was normal. He talked about Renee, about how her personality had always mirrored his in ways that felt like recognition when he was too young and too unexamined to understand why that was not the same as love. He talked about my mother, about how they had both, without ever discussing it, built a family that rewarded proximity over achievement, because proximity was what they could see. He did not make excuses. I want to be clear about that. He explained, there is a difference. Excuses ask you to let someone off the hook. Explanations just ask you to understand how someone got to where they were. I could give him understanding. I was not ready to give him absolution. Maybe I never will be entirely. But I am a woman who teaches literature, and I know that the most important thing about a person is not where they started, but whether they are willing to look at where they have been. My father looked. That counted for something. My book was shortlisted for a regional literary award 3 months ago. My principal submitted my full portfolio for the state award. I find out in the spring. Daniel and I bought a house in West Asheville with a porch wide enough for 2 rocking chairs and a small garden where I grow tomatoes badly and herbs surprisingly well. We eat dinner together every night. We read in the same room on weekends. We are building the ordinary, unhurried life I spent 30 years not believing I deserved. My father came to my book reading in Asheville. He sat in the 3rd row. He did not say much afterward, just waited while other people came up with their copies and their questions. And when the crowd had thinned, he picked up a copy from the display table and stood in line with everyone else. When he got to me, he held out the book. Would you sign it? I looked at him for a moment. Then I opened the cover and wrote, To Gerald, who taught me, in his own complicated way, that I had things worth saying. I hope you hear them now. He read it standing there. He closed the book carefully. He put it under his arm. He said, Thank you, Claire. It was the first time he had thanked me for anything in my adult life. I said, You're welcome, Dad. We are not fixed. I want you to hear that clearly. We are not the father and daughter from a movie where one hard conversation dissolves decades of damage. We have Sunday phone calls now, every other week, careful and honest, in a way we never were before. He asks about my students. He asked about the award. He has not called me extraordinary yet, but he is trying. And I have learned, in this past year, more than in any year before it, that trying looks different than it does in movies. It is smaller. It is slower. It does not arrive with music. It arrives on a Sunday afternoon with an awkward phone call and a man sitting in the 3rd row of a bookstore because he does not know how to say, I am sorry any other way. I will take it. Not because I have lowered my standards, but because I have finally stopped needing his validation to know what I am worth. That is the thing about being seen by the wrong people for your whole life. When you finally stop waiting for them to see you correctly, you realize you have been visible all along. To your students, to your husband, to your best friend, to the stranger who reads your book on a Sunday morning and misses church. You were never invisible. You were just looking for proof in the wrong direction. My name is Claire Whitmore. I am a teacher, and a writer, and a wife, and I am 34 years old, and I stood up at my own wedding in front of 180 people and said 6 words that changed the rest of my life. Not because the words were magic, but because they were true, and I had been swallowing the truth for long enough. If you are sitting somewhere right now carrying a version of this story, I want you to hear me say this directly. The people who overlook you are not the authority on your worth. They never were. They were just the loudest voices in the room when you were too young to know there were other rooms. There are other rooms. Go find them. If this story hit something real for you, share it right now with one person who needs to hear it. A friend, a sister, someone who has been sitting at the wrong table for too long. Subscribe to Revenge Stories Unfolded, because next week's story involves a woman who discovered her family had been cashing checks in her name for 6 years, and what she did about it will leave you absolutely speechless. Hit the bell. Leave a comment right now. Tell me, what were the 6 words you wish you had said? I will be in the comments reading every single one.